August 18th, 1590. John White's boat cuts through morning fog toward Roanoke Island. It's his granddaughter's 3rd birthday. He's brought gifts from England, a doll, fabric for a dress, things a 3-year-old girl might want. He's 3 years late. The crew rows closer. They shout, fire guns into the air, the signal they'd arranged. Silence. White steps onto the beach and walks into the settlement. The houses are gone, not burned, dismantled, as if someone carefully took them apart, planning to rebuild somewhere else. No bodies, no graves, no signs of struggle, just grass growing where floors used to be, and a word carved into a post: CROATOAN. For 400 years we stared at that word and called it a mystery. It wasn't a mystery. It was a message. And in 2012, we finally found the map that explained where they went. Before we understand what happened to the Roanoke colonists, we need to understand what they left behind, not just the carving. A map. In 2012, researchers at the British Museum were examining John White's original 1585 map of Virginia, preparing it for an exhibition, when they noticed something unusual. A patch, a small piece of paper glued over a section of the map. They'd seen it before, assumed it was covering a mistake, but no one had ever looked under it. When they examined it with X-ray spectroscopy, they found something hidden beneath the paper, a symbol for a fort, drawn in invisible ink, carefully concealed. The location, 50 miles inland from Roanoke Island, at the mouth of the Chowan River. Why hide it? Possibly to keep the site secret from Spanish raiders who might capture English maps. Or perhaps White was protecting a backup plan, a place the colonists could flee if the island became untenable. We know from White's own journals that before he left in 1587, the colonists discussed relocating 50 miles into the Maine. They were planning an escape route, and White marked it on his map, then hid it. When archaeologists excavated the site in 2015, now called Site X, they found proof. English artifacts from the 1580s, border-ware pottery, a style of ceramic that fell out of use by the early 1600s, meaning these pieces were already in the ground when Jamestown was founded. Aglets, the small metal tips that kept Elizabethan clothing laces from fraying. Gun parts, writing slates, a signet ring, the kind of personal belongings you don't trade away. The evidence suggests the Roanoke colonists didn't vanish. They relocated. And then, slowly, over years, they dissolved into a landscape that didn't keep English names. This is that story. To understand why anyone was on Roanoke Island in the first place, you need to understand England in 1584, desperate, watching Spain pile up gold from the Americas while England had nothing. Sir Walter Raleigh convinced Queen Elizabeth that North America could be England's answer, a base for raiding Spanish ships. Maybe, if they were lucky, a source of wealth to rival Spain's colonies. There was one problem. No one in England had any idea what they were doing. In 1584, Raleigh sent scouts. They returned with glowing reports. Fertile land, friendly natives, paradise waiting to be claimed. They'd barely been there a month. The location they chose was Roanoke Island, a strip of sand behind the outer banks of what's now North Carolina. On a map, it looked ideal, protected from ocean storms, close to the mainland. On the ground, the soil was acidic sand that wouldn't grow English wheat. The inlets were too shallow for large ships, and the island sat at the boundary of several Algonquian nations who had their own politics, their own wars, and no particular reason to welcome armed foreigners. This is still true today. The Outer Banks are a landscape in constant motion, barrier islands that shift with every hurricane, inlets that open and close, shorelines that redraw themselves with every storm. The colonists built their future on sand, literally. In 1585, England sent over 100 men, soldiers, scientists, mapmakers. Their leader, Ralph Lane, was paranoid and aggressive. When supplies ran low, he accused local tribes of hoarding food. When a leader named Wingina pushed back, Lane killed him. By 1586, the men were starving. When Sir Francis Drake's ships appeared, offering passage home, every single man abandoned Roanoke. The first colony lasted less than a year, but England wasn't done. Too much money spent, too much pride at stake. In 1587, they tried again. This time, they sent families. About 117 people arrived at Roanoke in 1587. Not soldiers, families, children, elderly, people who'd been promised land and a fresh start. Their governor was John White, the same artist who'd mapped the region 2 years earlier, a man tasked with leading people in a place that had already proven hostile. The plan was to settle farther north in the Chesapeake Bay, better soil, deeper harbors. But the ship's captain, Simon Fernandez, refused to take them any farther. Maybe he was tired. Maybe he wanted to get back to privateering where the real money was. He dropped them at Roanoke Island and left. The colonists found themselves back at the burned ruins of Ralph Lane's fort, and they had no choice but to stay. They rebuilt, planted gardens that wouldn't cooperate, tried to repair relationships with the CROATOAN people, one of the few groups that hadn't been alienated by Lane's violence. But Roanoke Island was never going to work. According to White's journals, the colonists talked about other options: moving inland, finding better land. White made maps, marked possibilities. On August 18, 1587, White's granddaughter was born, Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the Americas. It should have been a celebration, but supplies were running out. White made a choice. He'd sail back to England, get supplies, return within months. He promised his daughter he'd be back before winter. He kissed his granddaughter goodbye. He had no idea it would be 3 years before he saw Roanoke again. John White reached England in November 1587. By then, the world had changed. Spain was assembling the largest invasion force in history. 130 warships, 30,000 men. The Spanish Armada was coming to destroy England. Every English ship was seized for the war effort. White tried to leave anyway. In 1588, he secured 2 small ships. The captains immediately turned the voyage into a privateering run, attacking French ships, getting into a firefight, limping back to England without ever reaching America. White tried again, and again. War delayed him. Across the ocean, Roanoke waited. Picture the first winter. A mother rationing food, telling her daughter the ships will come in spring. Spring comes. The horizon stays empty. By the second winter, they've stopped looking for sails. By the third winter, Virginia Dare is old enough to ask, "When is grandfather coming back?" "I don't know, sweetheart. 3 years is long enough for hope to die. Long enough to realize England has forgotten you. Long enough to make a choice. Stay on an island with failing crops and no resupply. Or go somewhere you can survive." August 18th, 1590. White finally returns. His granddaughter's 3rd birthday. The island is silent. The settlement has been carefully dismantled, houses taken apart, belongings removed. This wasn't destruction. It was an orderly departure. No bodies, no graves, no cross carved above the post to signal danger. Just 2 carvings. CRO on a tree, CROATOAN on a post. The message was clear. We relocated. We went to CROATOAN. White wanted to sail there immediately, 50 miles south, to the island where Monteo's people lived. But a hurricane was building. The captain refused. They left. White never saw his family again. And for 400 years, we assumed the colonists went to CROATOAN Island, until we looked under the patch on White's map. The hidden fort symbol on White's map pointed inland, to Site X, 50 miles from the coast. And when archaeologists dug there, they found the artifacts that prove English people lived at this spot in the late 1500s. So which is it? Did they go to CROATOAN Island, like the carving said? Or did they go inland, like the map suggested? The answer is probably both. The emerging theory is called the split colony. The 117 colonists divided to increase their chances. A small group, maybe 10 or 15 people, went to CROATOAN Island. They carved the message, waited for ships, maintained contact with Manteo's people, but the families, the women, children, elderly, they went inland. To Site X. Today you can visit this spot. It's quiet, unremarkable, but in the 1580s this was the frontier, the edge of everything the English knew. 50 miles inland meant 50 miles from resupply, 50 miles from Spanish raiders, 50 miles from rescue. It also meant fresh water, rich soil, forest thick enough to hide in. It meant survival. But 3 years became 10. 10 became 20. By 1607, when English colonists arrived at Jamestown farther north, they heard rumors. William Strachey and others recorded accounts, secondhand, uncertain, of people with European features living among indigenous communities. Reports of mixed groups caught in regional conflicts they hadn't started. How reliable were these stories? Hard to say. They were written by Englishmen recording rumors, but they persisted. Some researchers point to oral histories among the Lumbee Nation and other tribes in the region. DNA studies have suggested possible European ancestry from the late 1500s, though these findings remain debated. What seems clear is this: the Roanoke colonists didn't disappear. They fragmented, adapted, intermarried. Some may have lived for decades, raising children who spoke Algonquian, wore deerskin, and barely remembered England. The colony dissolved. Not into mystery, into survival. We have the map, we have the artifacts, we have the journals. We're closer than ever to knowing what happened. So why did it take us 400 years? Maybe because the answer isn't dramatic enough. There was no massacre, no heroic last stand, no single moment where everything went wrong. Just people making a choice. They walked away from being English. Their children learned new words, wore different clothes, became something the history books didn't have a category for. Colonial stories are supposed to end in glory or disaster. Not this. The map was sitting in a London museum the whole time. We just didn't want to believe what it showed. The Outer Banks remember Roanoke differently. Families here tell stories passed down through generations. European ancestors who came from the water centuries ago. English names carried by people whose families were here before there was a name for this place. The Lumbee have a saying, "We were here before they knew where here was." Roanoke wasn't a mystery. It was a lesson. This land asked for more than courage. Survival meant learning from the people who already understood it. The colonists at Jamestown barely made it, saved by indigenous neighbors. The Pilgrims at Plymouth survived the same way, with Wampanoag help. But Roanoke came first, a story carved in wood and hidden on a map. The colony didn't vanish into nowhere. It vanished into somewhere, into families and bloodlines that were already woven into this place, into a landscape that doesn't preserve your story. It changes it. In 1590, John White sailed away carrying birthday gifts for his granddaughter. She never received them, but somewhere in the Carolina forests, in the families still here, in the connections between then and now, she lived on. Not as Virginia Dare, as someone new,